Zara, Isagef Hashem Eloheinu, Yishlach Ezecha Mekodesh U'Mitzion Yisadeka. Yizkor Kol Chisecha, Elohecha Yidashna Sela. Iten Lecha Chel Vavecha, Chalatzoscha Yimale. Rana B'Shuasecha U'Shem Eloheinu Midbar. Yimale Adonai Kol B'Shalei Secha. Ato Yudaitik, Yeshia Adonai Yeshichem. Yaneu Shem Kodshe. Shmei Kodshe. Beguris Yeshemine. Eila Barecha, Eila Basusim. Anachnu B'Shem Adonai Eloheinu Naskir. Heima Korov V'Nafogu. Anachnu Kamnu V'Nasedu. Adonai Yeshia Amelech Yaneinu V'Yem Kareinu. You can use this. Okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
This is here and this is here. So we're on page 132 in the Maimer Nasana, the Friedrich Rebbe, from Maimorim of the Kotim, Chelik Aleph, and we are here in Eis Gimel. And this copy we have here is page 132, and in this Eis, the beginning of the Eis is about how the day starts with. He describes if a person goes to sleep the proper way, the way he described previously, and then he'll wake up in the morning differently, the same way the Ani, and then to start davening with Haidu. So he goes into the difference between Moida Ani and Haidu. Because Moida Ani is basically acknowledging Hashem and expressing that I'm grateful to Hashem. And Haidu is acknowledging Hashem and being grateful to Hashem. In fact, the word Haidu and the word Moida, the same Hebrew word, the same root word, it means to say thank you, like Todah. And what is the difference? So he said the difference is that when you get up in the morning and you say Moida Ani, that's a general acknowledgement. And when you say Haidu, that's going more into details. Like we said yesterday, that just like Begashmis, when a person eats food, it definitely becomes part and parcel of my flesh and blood. But if you chew it up, break it down to smaller pieces, that absorbs it. And when the body absorbs it, it has more of an effect in terms of your nutrition. And the same is Baruchni, is that when you understand something, generally speaking, you understand it, it's in my head, it's in my brain, but when I break it down to details and I go into all the details, that's when it really penetrates and gets absorbed in the brain to the point that what I understand and my brain become absolutely one. And then, of course, it has a great impact on me in terms of my connection to Hashem.
Good morning.
Good morning, Leah.
Good morning.
Okay, so now we're going to start here on page 132. And we'll start with, I would say it's pretty much the middle of the page of the morning. There's the line that begins with the word V'hascholas hatfilah. V'hascholas hatfilah. Gets up in the morning, says Moida Ani, and then says Birchas HaShachar, the brachas, and then gets ready to daven. And it says in Gemara that you don't start davening until you are in a state of mind of Kavod Rosh. Kavod Rosh means humility. And in Chassidus it says, by learning Chassidus before davening, that's how you get this Kavod Rosh. In other words, before I start davening and speaking to Hashem, let me have a little bit more of an awareness. And then we start davening. So now we're up to that part. The beginning of davening is with the words, Hoidul Hashem Kiru V'Shmei, which means thank Hashem or praise Hashem, and both Kiru V'Shmei, call out to His name. Shishevach V'Edo Kechad. The words Hoidu, we're saying both. We're praising Hashem and we're thanking this acknowledgement and this thanking Hashem that we do when we say Hoidu. This is not the same like the Moida Ani that I say in the morning. Which one says immediately as soon as you get up. As we know, the first thing that should come out of a person's mouth in the morning is Moida Ani Lefanecha. Not, oh no, I can't sleep any longer. That should not be the first words coming out of your mouth to sleep. So Meidani Haidah Klolis is a general Haidah. For example, Echad Haraya Ezedavar, someone sees something and he sees that it's something amazing, but he still hasn't figured out exactly, but he sees that it's something special. Same thing with the thank you that we say in the morning. He sees explicitly Shakadosh Baruch Hu has a neshama. He wakes up in the morning and the first thought is, thank you Hashem for returning my neshama to me. And he says, I thank you Hashem, Melech Chai V'Kayam, Hashem who is a king that lives forever. That with your graciousness and your kindness, you return my soul to me. Rabba Munasecha, and Hashem, you can be trusted because I gave Hashem the neshama last night and He gave it back to me. So it's a general Haidah, and that it can't be much detail because I just woke up in the morning, I just opened my eyes. Hashem came Haidah zu the Haidu, but the Haidu is a different kind of thank you. As we said before, it's thanking Hashem and praising Hashem. At this point, he already details of the greatness of Hashem and the kindness of Hashem. And then he continues to read in the Siddur of Hashem, the Siddur that describes the praise of Hashem, Ba'amiras Baruch Shamar, Psuki de Zimra. And the fact that we praise Hashem, it's not because He needs our praise, Chas v'Shalom, but by praising Hashem, it means more of an awareness in our minds of the greatness of Hashem. And the more we realize the more I feel awe, and the more I feel love for Him. So then we start with the words Baruch Shamar. And then we go to Psukkah de Zimra. Psukkah de Zimra is the whole part of davening. Literally it means Psukim, verses of song. That's not, most of it is Tehillim. The whole part of davening from Psukkah de Zimra until Shema. So as the person goes along davening, Misrachev, U'Mizgadel, Etzlei, Habanose, Vasagose, Bo'er, the knowledge of the Hashem's light, Hamachayis Kol Nevrayim, that gives life to all creation, that knowledge becomes broader and bigger and deeper because I'm going into the details. What I'm thinking about the greatness of Hashem is something that I understand, that it's bihislapshus, b'seichel anushi, which means it's in a way that it's clothed in human intellect. To the extent that even the natural seichel of the animal soul, these two words are actually part of also something you should make note of as Hasidic terms. This for the board, or this something a dry erase marker, yeah? Whiteboard, okay. So these are, we had this in the previous Myra somewhere. Can you hear anything? On the board. Okay. So the Chassidus, we had this in the previous Myra, you might remember, that there's three kinds of seichel. One is called seichel hativi, which means natural seichel. Seichel hativi, the natural seichel. I'll sort of explain. The other one is called seichel enushi, which means human seichel. And the third one is called seichel eloki, godly seichel. That's a very light marker. This is enushi. Enosh is a person. This is seichel eloki. If someone would ask you how many souls do we have, 2 or 3? What's the answer? There's always supposed to be 2 opinions, so 5? You're actually right, there's 5 levels to the soul.
No, I know, but I'm trying to make it fun.
Keep going. So, in the beginning of Tanya, in the 3rd chapter, it says this, uses the term nefesh hamaskelis, the intellectual soul. Is that a 3rd soul? Is that part of the other soul? Where does it belong?
It's a part of the others.
It's a what?
Part of the others. It's part of both souls.
It's part of the other souls, and yet we give it a separate name. Yet we give it a separate name. So I want to explain this a little bit, use the opportunity to explain it. It's a very fundamental thing, and it's good to know, even though he's not going into this in detail, sort of by the way, but it's a good place to explain it. And that is as follows. The seichel eloki means the seichel of the godly soul. By the way, the seichel hativi can have another name, which is seichel. Here it says seichel hativi, that nefesh habahamis. If you want to know the spelling, look in here. Seichel anushi, then it says seichel hativi, 3 lines from the bottom, and then it says the seichel of the nefesh habahamis. So seichel hativi and seichel nefesh habahamis is the same. So there's the seichel of the godly soul, the seichel of the animal soul, and then there's something in the middle which is called the seichel of the intellectual soul. What is the difference? In one of the classes before, we spoke about what is the difference between the intellect of an animal and the intellect of a human, because animals do have intellect. In fact, the Gemara says that the shul, the fox, is pikach shebachayis. It's the smartest of all the animals. So first of all, that implies that animals have intelligence, and that the fox is the smartest of the animals. So animals do have seichel. If the question would be asked, what is the difference between the intellect of animals and the intellect of humans, most people will say, well, obviously humans are far more intellectual than animals. So that would be like, for example, if I ask, what's the difference between a simple person and Shlomo HaMelech? You'd say, simple person, his intellect is 1%, And Shlomo Melech's intellect is 100% or 1,000%. So too, animals' intellect is less, and the human's intellect is more. But that's not the case. First of all, it's true, of course, but it's not just a difference in quantity, it's a different kind of intellect. It's a different quality of intellect, a different caliber of intellect. And what we said then was that the intellect of an animal is only in connection to its animalistic and personal pursuits, which means we don't know of an animal thinking intellectually about something in an independent way. We only know of an animal thinking of intellect when it comes to whatever it needs for it personally. So we find animals that will do things which are very intelligent, how to get food. Or animals do things intelligent, how to escape a hunter, or how to capture another animal, or other things along those lines. Which means that in essence, there is no such thing as just independent intellectual thought. The intellect is almost like an extension of the emotion. I want the food, and how do I get the food? I see it on something high. So the monkey is going to take a chair and put it on the table, climb on the table, then climb on the chair and get the banana. Wow, smart. But the smartness is how to get the banana. Smart, how to run away from a hunter or anything else along those lines. So in a sense, it's really emotion. I want something, or I'm running away from something. And when I want or run away, there's an intellectual department there that helps me pursue what I want. That's all that it is. Human intellect is a totally different caliber of intellect, where a person could sit and just think about different things. How the sun and the moon and the stars, how does it work? Think about math, think about different intellectual concepts, nothing to do with what it's just pure intellect in its own merit. And this has nothing to do with the godly soul. This is just being human. As the famous Gemara says, if someone will tell you that the nations of the world have wisdom, but you can believe them, because there are brilliant people out there. If someone will tell you that the nations of the world have Torah, you can't believe them because they don't have Torah, they have wisdom. So that's another discussion. What is the difference? Isn't Torah wisdom? But wisdom and intelligence, in fact, the Gemara says there was a certain Tana that he would be debating with the Greek philosophers. And he was so brilliant that the Gemara said they were concerned that if he will no longer be here, there's nobody that can match those brilliant people. So there are brilliant people amongst Yidden, and have the brilliant people in the nations of the world. Brilliance. And this brilliance is not like, it's a different caliber than the seichel of an animal. What's seichel of a key?
Godly seichel.
What?
Like
Godly seichel.
Like knowing Hashem's greatness, and like you said about the Gemara, how like believe also that 17 nations have seichel. Of course they have seichel, because Hashem created them, but do they have a seichel to accept, to like understand Hashem's greatness? Right.
So seichel Elokei is the godly seichel, the godly soul, which understands everything about godliness, even though the human's intellect can also get there. But like we learned in the mind, the human intellect will interfere because the human intellect is based on self, and the self won't accept certain things because that would sort of deny its recognition of self by submitting and giving up to something higher. I don't know if I'll go into it because again, I don't want to just get lost. But to give you one example, what would be seichel Elokei? And this is more or less a general idea about seichel Elokei. When you learn Chassidus and you learn about the union of bittul, which basically means how the whole world is in essence godliness. In a sense, that's seichel Elokei. When you say learning about God, doesn't have to be seichel Elokei. Even the animals, even the human soul can understand that Hashem created the world. It's pure logic. You have a world. The world is so brilliant, so complicated. It doesn't make sense that it was created by itself. And I recognize there must be a creator. So there could be someone who doesn't have a nefesh elokis, but just logic dictates that Hashem created the world. And then from there, you go on further. This creator must be this way or that way, must have these qualities or those qualities. And I can recognize all that from creation itself, if I think about things objectively, in a pure objective way. But when you think about the opposite of how the world is not a true existence, the world is all about Hashem, these thoughts and this whole understanding, that comes from the Nefesh Elokis. That would never sort of register fully in the brain of a Nefesh Bahamas, of a human brain. Because the human brain, and like in one Maimon, it puts it this way, the Seichel Anushi understands the yes of existence. Seichel Eloki understands the no of existence. In other words, human Seichel understands everything about how the world exists. And Seichel Eloki understands how the world doesn't exist. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, it means how the world is all godly. So just like there are times, in fact, in the Gemara, there used to be a Maturgama, which means when the sages would teach, it was so deep that the people didn't get it from him, even though he taught it. So there was another person, one of his students, and this student was the bridge. He wasn't as smart and on the level of the teacher, because if they would be on the level of the teacher, just like they don't understand the teacher, they don't want to understand him. He wasn't on the level of the students, because then just like they don't understand, he wouldn't understand. He was somewhere in the middle. And he was the intermediary between the two. The teacher would teach, and then he would give it over to the people in a different language a little bit that they should be able to understand. So the teacher was all the way end of the spectrum, the students were the other end of the spectrum, and this person in the middle was the one who brought it and transferred it from the teacher to the student. In a sense, the same here. Eibishter gave us a godly soul and an animal soul. Oops, before I explain this, let me go back to the original question. So what are the three souls? The three souls are, there's a godly soul, there's an animal soul. So generally we say there are two souls. But why do we sometimes separate it? Because the Nefesh HaMa'avelis, which is the intellectual soul, is very different than the intellect in the animal soul. The intellect in the animal soul means a person who the extent of his logic and intellect and intellectualizing is only all about self, about food and about clothing and about money and about business and about power and about pursuing this and pursuing that. And these people could also be intelligent, but it's an intelligence that's all connected to their emotion. There's nothing higher that they think about except for just how can I get more money and how can I get more food? And how can I win the race with this or win the race with that? And how can I have more power? Or how can I do other things that will glorify my name in one way or another? It's all about me and my taivas and my pleasures. The second one is intellect for the sake of intellect. People who love studying, whether it's philosophy or math or science or whatever, they just love seichel. So it's a higher level of intellect than the intellect of Nefesh Bahamas. So sometimes we refer to them as three separate souls. And in a sense, it works the same way. The ultimate goal is that the godly soul should understand godliness to the extent that even my animal soul should get inspired. Even that part of me which is like a behemoth, and then all it cares about is self and pleasure and happiness and self-gratification. That's all it cares about. Even that part of me should get it and understand the importance, the value, the greatness of godliness. But the Nefesh Elokis and Nefesh Bahamas, they're not on the same wavelength. So the Nefesh Elokis explains it to the human soul, and the human soul explains it to the animal soul. So the Nefesh Asichlis is in between. He's the bridge, the mediator.
Wait, the human soul explains it to the animal soul, or the godly soul?
No, the godly soul talks to the animal soul. The animal soul has blank eyes. He doesn't know what you're talking about. So the godly soul talks to the intellectual soul. The intellectual soul talks to the animal soul. And that's how the message gets there. What does that mean? Let me translate that in simpler words. In other words, the godly soul understands things because it's a godly soul. But to meditate on it in this subject in a way and in a language that even the intellectual soul gets it. Now, the intellectual soul finds a language that the animal soul should get it. And that's how it gets from the top to the bottom. Yes, Amy?
Sorry.
So it's almost like translating something into a different language, which means that when you want to talk about, the greatness of Hashem, the way the godly soul understands it, it goes off totally and completely in a language which is pure godly, and the godly soul appreciates it. But if you want an intellectual person, so let's say there's somebody who's an intellectual, pure intellect, he's a scientist, like, as Professor Broniver writes about his process of tshuva. So he writes that he was an atheist. He was brilliant. He is brilliant. I should have a full shlema. He is a physicist. And then someone comes along and talks about how did he explain godliness in a pure philosophical way until he got it. But that's communication between the godly soul and the intellectual soul. But then when you're talking to people who are not so intellectual, they're not philosophical, all they want is, I remember once there was a couple that somehow they got married, but they were really very, very different. In this sense, she was an intellectual. She just loved reading books. And he was just very simple. I have no idea how they got together in the first place. But he was complaining to me. He says, I come home from work. My stomach is rumbling because I'm so hungry. And she's all excited about a book she read today. And she's talking to me about this book for an hour. And I'm waiting for my supper impatiently. I don't hear a word she's saying. It doesn't interest me. So there's two people talking, but they're not really communicating with each other because he's interested in his supper and to eat. And she's interested in this fascinating book that she read. This idea that's written in that book is really amazing. And to him, it just bounces off. So therefore, the godly soul can relate to the human soul, the human part of me, that intellectual part of me. And the intellectual part of me sort of carries it over to the animal soul in a language that even the animal part of me, the simple part of me, could get excited about godliness.
That's the neshama or the seichel that's having this?
Who's the that's?
Having this conversation of like the human, is it the human soul or it was the godly soul talks to the human soul talks to the animal soul.
Right.
But it's the neshama, not the seichel that we defined, or
that third soul that I mentioned, the intellectual soul. So the godly soul communicates with the intellectual soul, and the intellectual soul communicates with the animal soul.
And each one has their respective seichel?
Each one has their respective seichel, and each one, the capacity of that seichel is different. Like the animal soul only thinks in terms of, so how's it going to affect me? So if I want to talk to the animal soul about keeping Shabbos, I can't talk about the spirituality within it. I can talk about the fact that it'll bring you such peace of mind. It'll bring the family together. That's so beautiful. It'll bring a certain calmness into your life because one day a week you don't have to go to work and think about it. That's something even the animal soul could relate to. Yes, you're not saying to do this as a therapist. You're saying this is from Hashem and it's Hashem's mitzvah. So you're bringing in Hashem, but you're bringing in Hashem in a way that even the animal and its emotional pursuits could relate to it and appreciate it.
Would the seichel, like the enoshi, would be like, let's say like you're learning a mimer, and then that's more your like maybe your godly intellect, but then like your human intellect would be like what makes it practical, like we can take this and apply it here, maybe like your mitos or something more than your.
Yeah, not only that. Very often when you learn a mimer, they give a mashal from something begashmis. That mashal is sort of the neseichel anushi. So I'm talking about Hashem, which is godly, but then I give a mashal of something which is begashmias, which I can understand more. So in a sense, that's the way the godly soul is translating things in a language that the animal soul could get it. The intellectual soul could get it. So when you talk about Tzimtzum, for example, Tzimtzum of Shem Havaya and Shem Elokim, then I give a mashal of a teacher and a student that has to communicate something very deep and he has to conceal it. That mashal, the intellectual soul can get. And through the mashal, it can understand how it applies to godliness. The godliness soul doesn't need that mashal. It understands godliness purely because that's where it's at. Something along those lines. And then the animal soul, they have to explain it on a level that they could relate to. So that's what he said. Let's look at the words again. Hasagazu, this understanding about the greatness of Hashem that we say in davening, ba bislapshus b'seichel anushi. Islapshus means it's clothed. There must be a better word than that, but it means that the understanding of the greatness of Hashem is being translated in a language that it becomes understood to the human soul. Ad Asher, to the extent that also the seichel activity, the natural seichel, and the nefesh habahamis could also understand it. You see the three things? It doesn't use the word seichel alaki, but that's the first one. And then it comes to the seichel anushi, and then it comes to seichel activity. So basically, even if I'm talking to myself, if I'm thinking about something myself, it could go through these three stages. And certainly when I'm talking to another person, some people, they have to explain things in a way, like I said, if I'm talking to an intellectual, I have to realize I'm talking to an intellectual soul. And if I'm talking to somebody who's more simple, then I talk to their animal soul. You know, the Rambam writes that when you're educating children, you have to do it step by step. First, you tell them to do mitzvahs, and they're going to get rewarded. They'll get candies. And then you tell them to do mitzvahs, they're going to get, Hashem will give them more money. It's a little bit more valuable as they're getting older, more than just candy. And then you tell them they're going to get rewarded in Olam Haba. That's something more spiritual. And then you tell them to do the emes because it's emes, not because of Olam Haba. In other words, initial stages, you can't appreciate mitzvahs only because of the benefits that you get. But that's sort of the gateway to get to the right place. You know, there's some people that they have in their homes what they call Shabbos toys. They buy very good toys, very expensive toys. So they're looking forward to Shabbos because they're going to get these toys. That cabinet, which is locked, is going to open up and they'll play with it. So are they excited about Shabbos or excited about the toys? When you get to a higher level, you can't wait for Shabbos because it's a child. Oh, that's a different story, right? That's another level. And then when you get higher, you appreciate other things about Shabbos until you get to understand. However, the Yos and Nefesh Bahamas Ikra Midas, being that the Nefesh Bahamas is primarily emotion, and all the Nefesh Bahamas cares about is pleasure, and its desire and its will is Dvarim Gashmim, Gashmistic things, Mudba Bahem. In case we didn't get it, the Friedrich repeats it in Yiddish. Why does it repeat it in Yiddish? You know why? Because Nefesh Bahamas understands Yiddish better than, in those days, better than English. And it is in them, he's drowning in it. But Derech Pshitus. Derech Pshitus means this is so natural. Or Bergil is habitual, it became a habit. This is just what his life is all about. And he's bound. He's not just doing things that are worldly and he's bound to it, he's connected to it. That's why we say Psukkah de Zimra. And the word Zimra, it means Lazamer Aritzim. Again, the copies came out with this person's notes by mistake. Mm-hmm. But if you look at the top of the word, they wrote the right translation. The zamer means to sing. Psukei verses of singing, but there's another pasuk somewhere where it says lezamer aritzim, to cut weeds. Aritzim means weeds, and lezamer means to cut. What are weeds? Weeds are something growing in a garden or growing in a field that are actually not only they're not good for everything else. They could ruin the rest of the things that are growing. You have to cut them out. So it means in a garden, there's two things. You have to water whatever is growing. They need sunshine. They need air. They need things that will, it's like this is what will promote and help the growth of the plants. But then you also need to protect it from not being damaged by animals. Hafrid haram and nefesh bahamis. We have to separate the rab and nefesh bahamis, and to extract it, take it out, ma'refesh v'tit, from the mud. Animals are out in the street, in the mud, and they're having a great time. They're enjoying themselves because they're animals. They don't see anything wrong with it. So the animal soul also is invested in all these gashmistic pleasures, and they totally don't even realize that there's something not in order here. So we have to, the zamra ritzim, cut that out. The cutting out process is twofold. This is something we also had in the previous Maimer. When you have a block of wood, anyone remember this? When you have a block of wood and you have to make a keli, you have to carve it out twice. No. If you have a log and you want to make a wooden soup bowl out of the log, what do? First, you have to carve it out of the log, and you have this piece of wood. But inside, so it becomes a bowl. In other words, these are the words in Maimer. Hagolmi k'moshehu, this block of wood as it is, iyefsher lasis v'meni keli. You can't make a vessel out of a log. In order to prepare it, that you can even make a vessel out of it, first you have to carve it out, carving it out from the out, which means you carve it out of the log. And then you carve it inside, that this piece of wood should be able to receive something in it. That's the way it is begashmiks. So here you give a gashmiks a commercial, and now the Shabbamis could understand. What's the ruchnius? A human being is also like a log. It's a pasuk. Every human being is like a tree. By singing the greatness and the praise of Hashem. When we say the words of Zimra means singing. So we're singing means we're excited, we're inspired. This causes movement in the Nefesh Bahamis. What's the movement? For the moment, the Nefesh Bahamis gets caught up in what I'm saying and the words that I'm saying, the songs that I'm singing, and it separates Nefesh Bahamis from being so invested into his Gashmistic world. I remember once sitting down to talk to someone, and this was a program we had in the summer, and there was a girl there that was very excited about Yiddishkeit, but the guy she was going out with was totally disinterested. So she asked me if I could speak to him or come down for a day to the upper mountains. I said, okay, I'll speak to him. The poor guy, I found out later, she arranged a meeting with every single teacher that was there for the whole day. But anyway, I had the merit to speak to him first. So before we started, he said, before we begin, these were his words, before we begin, I want you to know, I'm an atheist, the son of an atheist. All I care about is one thing, if my car is going to get to work, that's all. Basically saying, I'm not interested in anything spiritual. It doesn't even exist in my world. My concern is, am I going to make it to work tomorrow or not? That's all. That's what the Nefesh Bahamis basically says. So you need to shake him up a little bit and say, hey, there is something higher than money, something more valuable than money, something that's more meaningful than money. And that's what we do when we do the davening and we think about the greatness of Hashem. For the moment, the person's a little bit lifted. And for that moment, there's a certain inclination to move a little bit closer to something higher. In other words, what happens is he calls this the carving out from the outside, the first stage. Hahanocha klolis, something registers, a general thought, that godliness is also something good. Up until then, it's all about potatoes and tomatoes and pizza and ketchup and whatever. And the idea that also something good, that's like a chiddush, that's something, a novelty, a new idea that never even occurred to the person. So basically, carving out from the outside means it's a general shakeup, that there's something higher, and then later you go into the details to get more excited about it. So now you know what to do during davening, but you have to be back in class at 10:30.
What did you say to him?
Yeah.
What did you say to him?
The ending was very interesting. I started to explain, we were talking about Shabbos. Oh, he brought up Shabbos. Says, first, I can appreciate exactly what he said. I can appreciate the idea that one day a week you don't work and you get together with the family. I think that's a nice idea. But why on Saturday? Sometimes I'd like to do it on Wednesday. So I said to him that on Shabbos, there's a certain spiritual energy in the world that enables you to do it. If you do it on Wednesday, it just won't work. I explained that to him. And then he says to me, it's the first time I heard something that made a little bit of sense to me. And I'm thinking, you just told me you're an atheist. You don't believe in anything else except for your car. And now I'm telling you there's more spiritual energy on Shabbos. And he's telling me that makes sense. So you understand what kind of atheist he is. But that was his point. Like the idea the Nefesh Bahamas could get, that the family gets together and we're all enjoying the family life and everything else, that I understand. But that on Shabbos, that's already something beyond. I don't get that. So you have to bring in, there's a certain godly light shining on that day. That's the part that's hard to understand. Okay. Good Shabbos, everybody. Absorb the godly light. It should be a very successful Shabbos. All our guests, Amir Hashem. Everybody try to behave this Shabbos, please.
For once.
Tell the Nefesh Bahamas to go for a walk and come back on Sunday.
Rabbi Majeski.
Yes.